Hey everyone, it's Mako here. I wanted to put up a quick tutorial on how to do cameras, and I'm going to show you how to make a dialogue tree. So if you have an adventure game, you can set it so the character has various dialogue interactions and then go from one to the next. So this is my new level. I've actually done quite a bit of this, so what I'm going to do is show you what I've done and explain it. This is my dialogue microchip. Right here I have a selector, and this is going to sort of run the dialogue through its course. So you can see it's on the first spot here, and that's sending an electrical signal to this AND gate, which requires another input to start the dialogue. So I'll show you what this other input is. That's this tag sensor down here. So you'll see I've set the minimum range to 17, and I've sort of put the SACbot in the middle as like a starting area. So when they walk out of this area, either left or right, it'll trigger this wire, which will set this AND gate off, and it'll trigger the first dialogue tree. Then the easiest way that you can do it is set this mouth, it has a little trigger on the end here, set this mouth to trigger the next dialogue, and then whenever the player is done reading this one, it'll go to the next one. So that's sort of the best way to get it so it doesn't repeat. But if you just want a single dialogue, so that the dialogue comes from another character and it doesn't repeat, I've set this up. This is a little SACbot, and what it does is if you come into this area but you haven't fulfilled this requirement, it's gonna set off this dialogue box telling you not to come in here. So the first thing it does is it checks for the player's SACbot, and then it checks for this toggle switch. So the toggle switch runs to the AND gate. So if it detects both the player and the toggle switch, it'll run the dialogue, and then the dialogue tree will, the mouth is connected back around to the toggle switch. This is an OR gate, meaning either one of these can switch off the toggle gate. So then when the toggle gate shuts off, it's no longer meeting both requirements for the AND gate, so it'll only happen once, and it's not going to bug the player every single time he comes back here. Now I have a cinematic camera here that I'm using it to highlight a specific area that I want the player to recognize. So when they walk into this area, they get a sense of where to go, so they're not lost, because I'm going to make a pretty big level. But what I want to do is I want to make it so this only happens once, and we're going to do something similar to the dialogue tree. I'm going to show you how I build that. So we have it right now so that the player enters this area. It's going to set off this camera, which is a cinematic camera that zooms out and shows them where I want them to see. And then that camera, when that one's over, it comes back to a placeholder camera, which you can see is right here. And this camera, I want them to hold it infinite. So if you do not have this camera, what happens is when this camera ends, it'll go all the way back down to your SACbot, your original SACboy, and it won't stay with the new camera. It'll look pretty unprofessional. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is put a toggle switch, and then we need an AND gate, so that both of these are required to start the camera. And then I'm going to hook this up to the first camera, and I'm going to hook the first camera up to the toggle switch so that when this camera runs for the first time, it's going to turn off this switch. You got to make sure it's set to on because by default it's set to off. And that's how to make a simple one-time trigger. You can use this for anything that can be triggered, so it's very useful. Before we test this, I want to go through the camera options to show you what's available. When you're having a SACBot, you don't want them to be able to run around when you're doing some sort of cinematic sequence. So make sure disabled controllers is set to yes. And then if you're doing a cinematic sequence, make sure skippable is set to no. If this is something that could be kind of long, that could be annoying to the player, and it's not really necessary to see, make sure skippable is set to yes. Alright, so let's try this out. Alright, so I have my character here. You'll see as he walks out of that area, it activates the first dialogue in the dialogue tree. But you'll notice it only activates once. Now we go over to this fella in here, and when you talk to him, that'll activate. But since that toggle switch was hit, it'll only activate once. And then as we activate the new movie camera, the Sackboy stops moving. And then it zooms across. And that highlights where I want the player to look. So I want them to go there. It cuts back to my regular camera, and then as I move again, it'll transition to the other camera. Everything's very smooth, so it doesn't disconnect the player from the level. That's very important.